Lakota. Mitaka pe wichasha o este emiono. Mitao oyate uglala Lakota. Ampetu este. Yushka wachiakelo. My friends, my relatives, my name is J.J. Kent, and I come to you from the Oglala Sioux Indian Nation. Something that I would like to share with you tonight from my culture is a very integral part of Lakota tradition known as storytelling. And oftentimes the stories that were handed down from generation to generation were intended to teach very important lessons to us. And the one that I would like to share with you now is one that was told to me by my uncle, who is the principal spiritual leader of the Oglala Sioux Nation. His name is Floyd Hand. And I would like to share this story with you now. There was a time long ago that the Great Spirit had two sons. And one day he called his sons in and told them that he was going to send them down to the earth to be born as humans. And he said to them, "My sons, after you have been there upon the earth for a while, then I'm going to call you home so that you can tell me what you have done." And so it was that the two sons of the Great Spirit came down to the earth and were born. And one of them grew up to be a fat chief who lived in a beautiful white teepee. And this lodge he kept so clean as to be as white as the freshly fallen snow. And the fat chief had many horses. And he kept his horses always very well fed and cared for. And their coats were shiny and they were happy. And his wife was always jolly. And there was good relations in his home and among his people because he cared for his people and looked after them. Now it happened that also the other son, the Great Spirit, also grew up and became a skinny chief. And this chief lived in a lodge that was very dirty and small. And he only had one horse. And this horse was always skinny. His ribs were showing and he was covered with sores because the chief did not care for him very well. And it happened that one day the fat chief and his wife were preparing to eat their evening meal. And the fat chief's wife brought out 2 plates filled with food. And as they sat down and prepared to eat, there was a sound that came from the brush. And they looked over, and out stepped a woman with 2 children. And the woman looked very sad, and her children were crying, for they were hungry. And they had no one to look after them, for the woman's husband had been killed in battle. And so the fat chief spoke to her and said, "Sister, come over here. Come and sit down and have something to eat, and bring your children." And they sat down, and the chief fed them. And he took the children upon his knee, and he spoke to them and talked to them. And he told them stories. And he talked to them about the importance of growing up with respect for their elders. And they were happy. And they went upon their way, and a short time later, there was another sound. And the fat chief looked, and there was a grandmother who came out of the brush. And she was hungry, for there was no one to look after her. She had lost her husband many years ago, and her son had also been killed in battle. And so the fat chief spoke to the grandmother, and he said, "Grandma, you come over here and sit down and have something to eat." And he looked after his people in this way, and they loved him very much. Now it happened that also the skinny chief was preparing to eat a meal one day, and his wife brought him a plate full of food. And he made no attempt to share this food with his wife. And as he sat down to eat, he heard a strange sound coming from the brush, and he looked, and there was a dog that came out of the brush. And this dog was very skinny, and he was mangy and covered with sores. And the dog approached the skinny chief with his head bowed and his tail wagging. And the chief looked at the dog, and he picked up a stick from the ground, and he beat the dog, and he chased him away. And then he continued to eat his meal without having shared any of his food with his wife or his family. Now it came there one day when the Great Spirit decided it was time to call the two chiefs home. And as the fat chief was laying there in his lodge on his deathbed, all the people came, and the people were crying, and they were lifting their voices up to the Great Spirit, and they were crying out to the Great Spirit and saying, "Oh, Grandfather, please do not take our chief from us. If you take him from us, who will look after us? Who will look after our children and talk to them and teach them good things? Take one of us instead, but do not take our chief from us." Now it also happened that the day came for the skinny chief to go home. And as he lay there in his lodge on his deathbed, no one came to pay their respects or to cry for him. There was only his wife, who sat on the other side of the lodge. And as she sat there, only one tear rolled down her face. But the side of her face that was turned away to the wall also had a half of a smile, because she knew that soon she would be free. I have also just a moment or two left here with you now, and I'd like to share also a song, a traditional song from the Lakota culture. This is one of our spiritual songs, a song of thanksgiving. In this song that I'm going to sing to you in the Lakota language, we give our thanks to the Great Spirit for our lives and for each day that we have on this earth. We give thanks for the sacred pipe that was brought to our people many, many years ago by the white buffalo cat woman. And we also give thanks especially for our children, for they are our future.
We chose a new